Sarah Thompson thought she knew everything about her husband, Mark, until a forgotten receipt, a fake name, and a hidden home in another state unraveled a chilling secret. Mark wasn't just living a lie, he was living two lives. Sarah Thompson lived in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Asheville, North Carolina, where life moved slowly and predictably. Her home was a two-story brick house with blue shutters and a swing on the porch, the kind of place where families raised kids and neighbors brought casseroles on Sundays. She had been married to Mark for 12 years, and to all who knew them, their marriage was a model of stability. Mark was dependable, charming, and well-liked in their community. He worked as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, a job that required frequent travel across the southeastern states. Every Monday morning, he would pack a black rolling suitcase, kiss Sarah and their 10-year-old son Jake goodbye, and head out for the week. He would return every Friday evening with stories of meetings, delayed flights, and roadside diners. To Sarah, this rhythm had become normal. She had grown used to the solitude during the week and the warmth of her husband's return each weekend. Mark always brought small gifts, an antique coin for Jake, a new book for Sarah, sometimes exotic snacks from unfamiliar places. He seemed thoughtful, attentive, and consistent. He never missed birthdays or anniversaries, and he sent texts every night telling Sarah how much he missed her and couldn't wait to be home. His charm disarmed any suspicion before it could ever take root. But over time, subtle changes began to show. At first, they were easy to ignore. Mark grew more guarded with his phone, often turning it face down or taking calls in another room. He started doing his own laundry, claiming he didn't want Sarah to worry about it, though he had never minded before. He became more forgetful, missing Jake's baseball games and mixing up details about friends or events Sarah was sure she had told him about. Still, she chalked it up to stress. His job had become more demanding, he said. There were new clients, longer drives, and more pressure from upper management. But something about it didn't sit right. Sarah had always trusted Mark, but now she found herself staring at the door after he left, feeling uneasy. Sometimes, when he said he was in a meeting and couldn't talk, she would wonder why she heard faint sounds of laughter or music in the background. When she asked him about it later, he always had a quick answer. He was in the hotel lobby, or someone else was on a call nearby. The explanations made sense, yet they didn't ease her growing anxiety. Her friends noticed it too. "You've seemed off lately," one of them told her over coffee. Sarah just smiled and said she was tired. But inside, she was beginning to wonder if her exhaustion wasn't physical at all. Maybe it was the weight of a truth she hadn't yet uncovered. Something about Mark had changed, and though she couldn't yet prove it, she could feel the cracks forming beneath the surface of their carefully built life. She didn't know it then, but her perfect world was about to unravel, and nothing, not even 12 years of love, loyalty, and trust, could prepare her for what she was about to discover. It started with something so small, Sarah almost threw it away without a second thought. Mark had rushed out for another week of travel, leaving his suitcase half-packed on the bedroom floor. Wanting to be helpful and secretly curious, she decided to finish the packing for him. She opened the main compartment and began organizing shirts and socks, placing his toiletries neatly in their usual zip-up pouch. As she reached into one of the smaller side pockets, her fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt from a family-style restaurant in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Sarah nearly tossed it in the trash, but something made her stop. She smoothed the receipt out and looked closer. The date caught her attention first. Saturday, just 2 days ago. Mark had told her he was at a business seminar in Atlanta that weekend and would be tied up with presentations and client dinners. But this receipt placed him over 100 miles away from where he said he'd be. That alone was strange, but what really chilled her was the handwritten note at the bottom. "Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Family meals always warm our hearts. Mr. Wallace?" Mark's last name was Thompson. He had no reason to be using another name. Sarah stood frozen in the bedroom, the receipt trembling in her hand. Questions raced through her mind. Was it a mix-up? A joke? Could he have picked up someone else's receipt by mistake? But the odds felt too narrow. She wanted to believe in an innocent explanation, but something deep inside her whispered that this was just the beginning. That night, unable to sleep, she retrieved Mark's laptop from his office. He rarely used passwords around her, and tonight was no different. She opened his email account and scanned through the inbox. Most of it looked legitimate: work-related correspondence, company newsletters, travel confirmations. But when she checked the folders, she noticed one titled SRW Holdings. It didn't seem related to his job. Curious, she opened it. What she found made her stomach twist. The emails were all under the name Stephen Wallace. There were hotel reservations, dinner confirmations, and delivery receipts. Some included photos, pictures of birthday balloons, children's gifts, even a note to a florist thanking them for a bouquet sent to Karen. Sarah's name was never mentioned. It was as if an entirely different man had been using Mark's computer. The pieces didn't fit together, yet the pattern was clear. There was a second identity, a second life. And suddenly, all the small things, his guarded phone, the changed behavior, the excuses, clicked into place. Her husband wasn't just lying about where he was going. He was lying about who he was. In the days that followed, Sarah couldn't concentrate. She found herself rechecking bank statements, phone logs, even Mark's social media posts. Everything seemed so carefully curated, so rehearsed. She had never felt more like a stranger in her own home. And though she wanted to confront him, something told her to wait. If Mark had gone this far to hide something, she needed more than a receipt and a suspicion. She needed the truth, whatever that truth might be. Sarah decided it was time to get answers she couldn't find on her own. She contacted a private investigator named James Holloway, a former police officer known for his discreet work. She handed over everything she had: copies of the receipt, screenshots of the emails, and a timeline of Mark's travel schedule. James didn't make promises, only said he'd look into it and get back to her within a week. That week felt like a lifetime. Sarah went through the motions of her daily life, caring for Jake, going to work, smiling at neighbors, all while her mind spun with questions she couldn't stop asking. What if he was sick? What if he had a secret from his past he couldn't share? But deep down, she already knew this was something darker, something deliberate. When the report came back, Sarah read every word slowly, as if rushing through it might make it less real. Mark, or rather Stephen Wallace, had a second home in Chattanooga. The modest two-story house sat in a quiet residential neighborhood. He had been visiting regularly, always midweek, during his supposed business trips. James had captured photos of Mark entering the home with groceries, taking out the trash, even helping a child with their bike in the front yard. But it wasn't just the house. Inside lived a woman named Karen Evans and two young children, a boy and a girl, aged 7 and 4. The report listed birthdays, school names, and even insurance documents that showed Stephen Wallace as the children's legal guardian. Mark wasn't having an affair. He had built an entire second family. Sarah read that line over and over, unable to grasp it. It wasn't a fling. It wasn't a mistake. It was a parallel life that had been running alongside hers for nearly a decade. And Karen Evans wasn't just a girlfriend. She was listed as Mark's wife in Tennessee state records. According to the marriage certificate, Mark and Karen had been legally married for 7 years under the name Stephen Wallace. Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through the rest of the photos and paperwork. She saw a birthday party for the little boy, with Mark lighting the candles. She saw a family picnic in a park, with Karen resting her head on Mark's shoulder. She saw a life that looked just as happy and complete as her own. She couldn't cry. She couldn't scream. There was only silence, a hollow, sinking silence that filled her chest and made her question everything she had ever known. How could he love two families? How could he lie so well for so long? That evening, Sarah printed out the photos and laid them on the dining room table. She looked at them one by one, studying the face she thought she knew so well. Mark's smile was the same, his posture, the way he looked at the children. Nothing in the photos seemed off. He looked like a man entirely at home, entirely himself. But now Sarah knew the truth. Her husband didn't just leave for work every week. He left to become someone else. The truth shattered everything Sarah believed in: her marriage, her memories, even her understanding of who Mark really was. It all collapsed under the weight of the deception. After reviewing the private investigator's report multiple times, Sarah contacted a lawyer. She needed legal advice, not just emotional support. What Mark had done wasn't just betrayal, it was a potential crime. And Sarah wanted to know exactly where she stood. The attorney, a calm and experienced woman named Linda Meeks, reviewed the evidence carefully. Her reaction was immediate. "This is more than infidelity," she told Sarah. "This is bigamy, identity fraud, financial deception, possibly even federal crimes if he used false documents across state lines." Linda explained that under North Carolina law, Sarah's marriage to Mark was valid, which made his second marriage in Tennessee illegal. Bigamy was a felony offense in both states. Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that she wasn't imagining things, and dread over what was coming next. Legal proceedings began quietly. Linda filed for divorce and submitted the investigators' findings to state authorities. Within weeks, an official investigation was opened, and law enforcement began tracing Mark's steps. What they uncovered was even more shocking than Sarah had anticipated. Mark had created the alias Stephen Wallace almost 10 years ago, right around the time he started traveling more frequently. He had obtained fake documents, social security cards, tax records, even employment records that listed Stephen Wallace as a self-employed consultant. It explained how he could support two households. He had opened credit cards in both identities and funneled money between accounts, making it nearly impossible to detect the overlap without serious scrutiny. Karen Evans, the woman in Chattanooga, had no idea about any of this. She believed she was legally married to a man named Stephen Wallace. She thought his trips to other states were just part of his job. When the authorities interviewed her, she was devastated. She had met Mark at a trade show, just like Sarah had, and fallen in love. He had wooed her with the same smile, the same warmth, the same promises. Now she realized her entire relationship had been a lie. As the case gained momentum, prosecutors brought multiple charges against Mark. Bigamy was at the center, but the financial crimes added weight to the case. Mark had secretly taken over $90,000 from Sarah's accounts over the years. He'd forged her signature on loan documents, opened lines of credit in her name, and even used her identity to secure a down payment on the Chattanooga home. In court, Mark sat silently as evidence piled up. He showed no emotion, no remorse. Both Sarah and Karen testified, each telling their story through trembling voices and tear-filled eyes. Their lives, once completely separate, were now tangled by the same man's web of lies. Despite the mountain of evidence, the legal battle stretched on for months. Mark's defense tried to argue mental illness, but psychiatric evaluations found him competent. His actions weren't impulsive. They were calculated, sustained, and deeply manipulative. Eventually, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty on all counts. Mark was sentenced to 12 years in prison. But for Sarah, no sentence could erase the damage he had done. Her life had been split in two, the one she lived and the one she never knew existed. 6 months had passed since the trial, and though Mark sat behind bars, Sarah's life still felt unsettled. The media attention had faded, the neighbors had stopped whispering, and Jake was slowly returning to the routines of childhood. But Sarah couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't over. She tried to rebuild her life. Therapy sessions, long walks, helping Jake with school projects, focusing on work. But trust, once shattered, left sharp edges that nothing seemed to dull. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. The envelope had no return address, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a neatly folded note and several photographs. The letter was from a woman named Maria Lopez, who lived in Austin, Texas. She explained that she had seen news coverage of Mark's trial and recognized his face. She knew him as Daniel Reed, a man she had been dating for nearly 5 years. He had told her he was a consultant who traveled frequently between states, sometimes disappearing for weeks, always with believable excuses. They weren't married, but he had proposed the previous year, and she had said yes. Her family had met him. They had begun planning a wedding. Sarah stared at the photos in disbelief. There was Mark, or Daniel, smiling at a barbecue, wrapping gifts at Christmas, even posing with Maria's parents. The familiarity of his posture and expressions chilled her. He looked so comfortable, so sincere, like he belonged in that life just as he had in hers and in Karen's. Maria's letter included details that made it impossible to dismiss. Receipts from restaurants, texts from numbers Sarah recognized, a photo of a keychain gift Mark had once given Sarah, identical to one now in Maria's possession. He had told Maria he had no children, no ex-wife, and no family commitments. He said his work required secrecy because of sensitive clients. When she pressed him, he would charm his way out of answering. Sarah forwarded the letter to the authorities. Investigators reopened the case, shocked by the possibility that Mark's web of deception was even larger than anyone had imagined. The FBI stepped in, examining travel records, financial transactions, and digital footprints. They discovered signs of at least one more alias used in Florida. There were hotel reservations, bank accounts, and purchases tied to yet another name, Paul Andrews. Each new identity had its own story, its own routine, and each was carefully constructed to keep the others hidden. Mark had built a life not on lies, but on layers of lies, stacked so precisely that none bled into the other until someone started looking too closely. Law enforcement couldn't determine how far the deception went or how many victims were still unaware. Mark wasn't just a man living a double life. He was a serial imposter, using charm, confidence, and calculated detachment to slip into new roles like costumes. For Sarah, the final twist wasn't just that her husband had deceived her, it was that she might never know the full truth. There could be more families, more children, more lives disrupted by the same man. But one thing was certain. The person she had once called husband was a stranger in every possible way. And though justice had been served in the courtroom, the emotional sentence would last a lifetime.